Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure for me to welcome you here at the Diplomatische Akademie Wien. We are going to discuss this morning 4 years of Slovene activities regarding security policy in Europe. And it's a pleasure that we can do it here, because I remember the beginning of the NATO cooperation embassy activities also happened here at the Diplomatische Akademie, and different times 4 years ago. Discussing security is an issue which at this place, at the Diplomatische Akademie, has always been in the center. You may have been aware that we organized a few conferences on the issue of the Austrian position in the security concept of Europe and how it has been changing over the last few years. One might say that this is an uphill struggle that we Austrians have to fight here, because in the Austrian population one gets sometimes the impression that our people, majority of our people, are very happy that we are surrounded by NATO countries, but at the same time that they are happy that we can criticize the NATO at the utmost as much as possible. So there is some sort of schizophrenic attitude also in the Austrian population, but things are changing, I have the feeling, and I guess this will also be part of the discussion of this morning with the representative of the Austrian military. Just let me say that this place will always be a place where we may discuss these issues, and I do hope that our activities regarding an improvement of the Austrian security position will continue. There are some few positive elements already, the update of the security strategy and also the commitment regarding the European Sky Shield are positive signs that even in Austria there is a discussion about security policy in Europe. But I'm here only to welcome you and to wish you an interesting time. When Slovenia took over, NATO was in a totally different position. Everything changed. It was the beginning of Biden. Now it's the end of Biden. It was before the war, the direct war of Russia, and it was still a time when there was a president of a European country talking about NATO as being brain dead, as we remember. Things have changed now. We have new members. There are new members of NATO, and even an impossible case such as Cyprus is discussing about whether they would apply to join NATO. So welcome from my side, and I wish you an interesting discussion, and thank you goes to Slovenia for the work they did in the last 4 years. Welcome.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Director Brix, for this kind introduction, and for the invitation to come here. It's really a pleasure to be here. Before we start, let me shortly introduce you to the participants. So I would like to start with you. This is Bruno Hofbauer. He's capability director of the Austrian Army since 2020. He has collected some wide international experience, be it in Bosnia, but also, as I learned, in Brussels. He's also deputy head of the General Chief of Staff of the Austrian Army. So it's a great pleasure to have you here. Please give a hand to General Major Bruno Hofbauer. Well, next to me, no need to really introduce him here in Vienna, is Aleksander Geržina, Ambassador of Slovenia. So it's his second time here in Austria, a second term. He has already been ambassador here. He was posted, if I remember it right, not only in New York, but also in Brussels, in Den Haag, also in Balkan countries. He was very close to decision mechanisms when Slovenia joined the European Union and NATO back then. And, well, that's the reason for the whole event now. He is NATO contact point here in Austria since 4 years. And we want to discuss the topic of security policy in Austria exactly in this context. So I would like to start with you, Mr. Ambassador, just to give us a look back to the last 4 years. So there have been dramatical changes. Ambassador Brix has already mentioned it. In fact, it's a world in complete turmoil. We see some really deep geopolitical shifts, especially since Russia has attacked Ukraine. Since then, 2 countries have joined NATO, Finland and Sweden, and another neutral country, Cyprus. This was also already mentioned recently. I mean, the president of Cyprus recently openly pondered whether his country should join NATO as well. So, Mr. Ambassador, could you give us some short idea about your time as a NATO contact point? Maybe also we could corroborate what happened here in Austria, but at the beginning maybe to give us the global picture of the security situation here in Europe. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Christian. We know each other over 15 years, so I guess we could be as Christian and Aleksander, but thank you for this introduction. And thank you, General Hofbauer, that you are with us today. The plan was that Chief of General Staff, General Striedinger, will be today with us, but he has to go for EU military exercise in Germany. So, but we have the General Hofbauer is also the chief planning officer, so to say, in the Austrian army. So I guess he's the right person at the right moment this morning. Christian, I don't know to introduce you. We know you very well, but you are foreign policy editor of the Presse and a trusted collaborator of our embassy also in the course of last 4 years. Yes, the last 4 years or bit less, 3 years and 10 months. What can I say? When we started this role for the second time in Austria, because we already were NATO contact point embassy between 2004, immediately after the beginning of our membership between 2004 and 2006, so it's the second time. It was a completely another world, as Ambassador Brix said in his introduction. Trump administration was leaving, Biden administration was just in its first, so to say, weeks. But it was, I wouldn't say that it was, you can see it already at that time that things will become to be a changing European security environment, because relations with Russia were as they were around 2020-21. We had the Crimea annexation by Russia in 2014, and of course the security situation was not very positive already at that time. But then, after the Russian aggression on Ukraine on the 24th of February, things changed dramatically for allies, for the alliance, for Ukrainians, of course, for a number of other aspiring countries in Southeastern Europe, but also for Austria. At the beginning, in first months of 2020, actually nothing happened in Austria. This is my personal observation from the first weeks and months. And of course, there were a lot of public appearances, discussions, also here. But not that I would remember that somebody would say, okay, what does it mean for us, Austrians? Nobody wanted to actually to go deeper into the discussion what security consequences this biggest and largest war in Europe since 1945. If I leave aside wars in Yugoslavia that were basically wars between former republics of a former state, this still is the biggest and largest war in the middle of Europe. But it was kind of polite ignorance in the first months. Then we started to have our activities, public debates, articles. I tried to talk to people in Austria to see what we can do to discuss about broader security environment, not about Austria and NATO, because this is not our role to you know, we are here to make our activities in line with NATO contact point embassy's role. But if I remember now correctly, it was quite, you know, Ukrainian border is about 500 kilometers from Vienna, Uzhgorod, but nothing really happened in first months in the discussions how this war is now will now apply to us, to Austria, to our security environment. Then slowly, in 2023 and the whole year of 2023, it changed. It changed to a certain point. Not that we would have in-depth discussions, but you know, the discussions started about new security strategy. The defense budget was increased. So slowly but surely, you know, it went in such a way that you can see that something is going on also in Austria. I'm speaking now about the political side, and generally speak about how the first months were within the military, and this is maybe for the beginning.
Well, thanks.
Yes.
Thank you. Let me turn to you, General. Maybe you could give us a picture, you have already mentioned it, about the military side of things. According to your view, what has changed, maybe also in regard to Austria?
Yeah. If you allow me, I need to go a little bit back in time. Austria joined the Partnership for Peace in 1995, so it will be 30 years next year.
Right.
This is something that really brought the Austrian armed forces forward. What was the reason for that question to work together more closely with NATO? Clearly, the situation in the Balkans. Austria was participating in I4, S4, later on in K4, then we went with NATO forces into the operations in Afghanistan. And this is where the armed forces come in, because we did, during the 60s, 70s, 80s, things on our own. We did it in Austria from a neutral perspective, being more or less part of the Western world, but military neutral, and so we developed our own doctrine, our own tactical symbols, our own map system, and suddenly our soldiers were side by side with Germans, British soldiers in operations, and it was clear that interoperability was a main task, and interoperability just is not that you have the same plug to connect electrical parts or whatever, or that you have the right ways to communicate, that one understands each other, that you have the same doctrine. And over the 30 years, I think many things have happened, and it brought the Austrian armed forces truly forward, and that participation in exercises is not a problem at the moment. The joint operations in the Balkans are the one thing. On the other side, for the capability development, NATO has a certain procedure how to operate with partners. This is it was called the planning and review process, going for 4 years, where you discuss a partner version, more or less, for what the NATO allies call the capability targets. You come up with partnership goals. And NATO is very, I would say, helpful. For instance, if the Austrian Armed Forces develop or want to field new capabilities, we discuss a certain goal and we get the documents that we need. Of course, the need to know between a partner country, not being NATO, with the NATO allies, is always something that needs to be observed, which is clear from my perspective, but not to everyone. From the perspective of the last 4 years, especially looking to what happened in Ukraine, I would say the shock wave was clearly felt in Austria, in the population, in the political arena, and of course in the military. Nobody had expected things to happen like that. This had the consequence that the defense budget was substantially increased by the last government. And I would like to share my position on that, what is on the horizon. The capability development in the Western armed forces is going on now rapidly. More money, considering the lack of mass, the missing brigades, the lack of airplanes and of warships, cyber capabilities and even space assets has become something that is not written down and everybody knows it, but nobody wants to do anything about it. There is really something going on. And we need to see that Russia is in the process of reinforcing its military posture in the strategic direction west. It's pursuing an equipment program within the military-industrial complex and expanding its connections with states like Iran, North Korea and China. This is something that we cannot oversee also in Austria. It will take some years that the Russian armed forces will reconstitute their capabilities and eliminate the weaknesses revealed during the war. However, acknowledging this backlog in the armed forces on the ground for the conventional side, this has no impact at all on the capabilities for warfare below the threshold of open combat in the space and air domain and on the nuclear capabilities. So we need to prepare, and this is of course something that also is necessary for Austria, for a possible very unfriendly state in the east who might take advantage of any weakness that we might show, anything that might come up now for Europe after the new election will take power in Washington. And of course we also see from the Austrian perspective, this is of course a political question, that there is talk between Moscow and Washington, and Brussels is a bystander, more or less. For Europe, NATO will remain the dominant military organization for over the next decades. The idea of a joint European defense framework within the European Union, independent of NATO, has been exposed as an illusion. And we need to see that most European countries are now part of the EU member states are part of NATO. It's 90% of the EU population that is now member of NATO. And so, where do we find Austria? Somewhere in the middle. I explained that the cooperation with NATO is working. Has it become harder during the last years? Of course it has. Because of the shift from stabilization operation, where many nations work together in Afghanistan, in Bosnia, or are still working together now in KFOR, this is not the main effort anymore. And the money and the main effort of the training goes into common defense and bringing up to making secure plans, bring them to life. That is the main effort now. There is no role for someone who is outside. Mm-hmm. On the other side, we need to see that this might change again, because it has changed rapidly with the fall of the Berlin Wall. that we were from territorial defense, also from the NATO perspective, on the German border, towards expeditionary operations. And only few, especially European NATO countries, were able to conduct expeditionary operations in the 1990s. That developed over the last 30 years, and now it goes back to collective defense, which is a complete change of the setup of the armed forces, and it might change back in 5, 10 years when we find ourselves maybe somewhere else again outside of the North Atlantic Treaty area. So that's it from my perspective to start with.
Well, thanks a lot. Well, we could touch now several subjects. Thank you for your great analysis. But let me start with Austria first, and it's a question to both of you. Why do you think, you said in the end there was something like polite ignorance, and I remember that the whole discussion about security policy was declared over before it had even begun. So this was just a few weeks after the Russian attack. Why do you think is NATO some sort of taboo, political taboo in Austria? Why do politicians hesitate to get in touch with it? Why was security policy not really an issue during the last election campaign, for instance? What's your analysis, having observed the discussion for a long period of time now?
There are many reasons. First of all, I think Austria was taken back when the war started, as General said, and as we said at the beginning, nobody really expected that Russia will launch a fully fledged war on an independent sovereign state. So my personal belief is that maybe countries such as Austria, who are and are still neutral, it was quite a shock for them, because suddenly the security environment changed dramatically around, if we are talking about Austria, around Austria. All neighboring countries to Austria, apart from Liechtenstein and Switzerland, are members of NATO, and this is a certain factor which goes also in hand with Austria's security concerns. But it has a long tradition, you know. Austrian neutrality is connected to the sovereignty of Austria, because the neutrality in Austria is, of course, connected to the Austrian State Treaty, signed in 1955. We will have 70 years next year. And the whole process between 1945 and 1955, when Austria was occupied by 4 Allied powers, has it in memory of Austrians. These 10 years are connected to not having the full sovereignty, taking decisions in discussions with the Allied powers and so on. The city was divided in 4 zones, 4 war zones. So, and when it started, you know, the new era started for Austria. Economic prosperity. It was Cold War, and Austria found it immediately with Vienna as a capital city.
Let me ask you bluntly, do you think there's a role for neutrals inside the European Union?
Well, it still is, I would guess. Mm-hmm. It still is, but it has to be redefined, because neutrality, as Austria has it in its constitution, and as it was foreseen before the signing of the Austrian State Treaty, goes back in other security environment and other circumstances. So, of course, this neutrality is then connected to the kind of comfort zone that Austria found itself in the 50s, especially 60s, 70s, being a bridge between East and West, a place where East and West met, Brezhnev, Khrushchev, Kennedy, Carter,
But
and
if
so
I get
on.
you right, you are still waiting for this redefinition.
Of course.
Okay. General, you've mentioned that there is a pragmatic relationship between the armed forces, obviously, and it started with some real problems in Bosnia. You've mentioned the interoperability. Would you sometimes wish a similar pragmatic attitude in the political sphere?
Well, I'm not a politician, but
Yes.
I
That's why I'm asking
I
you.
see that I think we have a quite pragmatic approach towards NATO.
Yes.
We have an ambassador there, and we have parts of our military representation. So I would not say that this is not working, but this is the ambassador brought it to the point from my perspective. It's immediately directed to the question of neutrality. And the neutrality is in Austria such a big narrative that we are relying on neutrality, that it brought us our freedom. That when I was a child, I learned in school that the last Russian soldier left on 26th of October, not that we made the neutrality law, but this is something that is highly in the brains of the Austrian population, and it is very hard, the political landscape in Austria, to even start a discussion on that, frankly.
Do you think that the Austrian population has a correct picture of NATO? Or
From my perspective,
yes?
no,
No.
certainly not.
Okay.
This is not the case, but this is also true for many other things.
So what is the difference between the cliché Austrians have and the real picture of NATO?
Well, I think it is kind of a vicious circle, From the political elite, nobody wants to tackle the issue of future security arrangements of Austria or NATO, not necessarily Austrian membership in NATO, because we knew it is on Austrians to decide about it. But, to start a discussion, because the politicians fear this will have some implications on their election and on the results of at the elections. And the same is also goes for vice versa. Public, because of no discussion at all, still in these old kind of stereotypes of NATO Pact and the Warsaw Pact, and we are in between, and nothing could happen to us because we are neutral. We are kind of, and everybody is waiting for somebody to start a deep discussion. And I think this will come on Austria inevitably in next years. Because also when war in Ukraine will be over, and I really hope in few months that there will be a kind of settlement, maybe interim. But this discussion will inevitably return back on Austria. What will be our security arrangements, speaking for Austria now? How should we move towards a new, redefined position of Austria in Europe towards the 2030? Because the world out there will not be a safer place. It will be even more dangerous place. We have other actors. We have non-governmental actors. We have home politics. Don't forget that we have a new element in all these discussions. We talk now about foreign elements and so on. But in a number of EU and NATO member countries, we have new political parties coming to power that don't want to be part of Western alliances, that don't want to be even closer to the West, also in Austria. In many other countries. So this is a new element that is coming, not only foreign aggressions and so on.
Well, and I think this all worked very well during the last 24 years when the weather was fine. Now that the clouds are coming, it's getting harder, and the world is a darker place
This is
than it
usually
was
the case.
25 years ago. And we need to consider something else, which is the Article 42.7 of the European Treaty, which is something that is even, from my perspective, stronger than the Article 5 of NATO, because it gets quicker. Because one nation says, we need help, and the others are obliged to help. You don't need to go to Brussels and it's us in a consensus if there is an Article 5 or Article 4 operation. So this is something that needs to be considered in the Austrian environment, because we are in the middle of Europe and we are inside EU, which is not an economic circle anymore. It's
more than that.
It's more than that, and but we are outside NATO, bringing it to the question that are we an easy target? Because for sure Moscow doesn't see us as a friendly nation; they see us as an unfriendly nation, part of the western part of the world. That is.
So what do you mean by that? That Austria could be an easy target?
It's an easy target
how
because
could Austria be attacked? So
by air. The narratives are already going on. You can see that. You maybe saw it on Sunday. Cyber. The next stage would be air. And who knows what else?
am I right?
Sabotage, espionage, that's going on
Is
anyhow.
there awareness for this in the Austrian leadership, political leadership?
Yes.
But they don't speak openly about it, or they keep it to themselves. All right.
I don't know.
You've spoken also about Russia, and I sometimes wonder. I wrote about it today in a piece. I met not only one person who told me that this could well be a very dangerous period. I mean, the period until the inauguration of Donald Trump. As you are responsible for planning, do you see a scenario where Russia could test NATO in the weeks or months to come?
Well, this is a very tricky question. Of course, there are scenarios that we need to consider. On the one side, we don't know, at least I don't know, and I'm speaking now from my personal military perspective. We don't know what's going on inside Kremlin, and inside the Kremlin, and what the elites are thinking there, and how they assess what the West is doing, and what their internal pressures, especially from the economic sides, are that are influencing them. Is their wealth in danger? How do they see the next 5 to 10 years? What we don't know. On the other side, they have the perception that the West is now beefing up the military machine and bringing troops even closer to them. And Sweden and Finland, which are highly potential military factors, are now also part of this NATO. And they have even now a longer border with NATO through Finland. They need to feel the pressure on their northern fleet and their nuclear deterrence, which is connected with that. So, could there be the idea, because they know that NATO is getting stronger and stronger, to test before NATO is ready? It could be one thing, but I do not personally assess that very likely.
Okay. Aleksander, two questions arising from this. One, do you also have the impression that Kremlin is more and more like a black box, and nobody really knows what is going on there, and how they think, and how could this black box be cracked in a way? So do you think that there isn't enough contact between European leaders and the Kremlin, for instance?
I don't know. I don't want to speculate about the black box in Kremlin. I also think there are some contacts between the incoming administration and Kremlin already, and we've seen some nominations for top positions in the new administration, and I guess, never mind what we personally think of some of the of appointments, but I think this shows that there is certain inclination towards a direct talks on the part of new administration with Moscow, and President-elect Trump said himself on a number of occasions that solving the war in Ukraine would be his first priority. Now we will have, of course, to wait. What I see is that the sanctions are beginning to function. We have some reports from our embassy in Moscow and some other reports from the EAS in Brussels that sanctions are beginning to function within the citizens, within the public opinion also. But otherwise, we will have to wait. But you are right. It will be kind of in limbo in next few weeks till now, and the next administration is still a month and a half, and a lot could happen. A provocation here, a provocation there, cyber attacks. So we have to be very very present, nevertheless, because the Christmas holidays are coming. But we should be very awake.
Well, these are times when the unexpected happens.
The strategic surprise.
Well, I don't remember. I'm doing this job for I don't know 25 years now, and we've just witnessed in the last years a chain of very unexpected things to happen. Well, and it was already mentioned that Macron once called NATO brain dead. So there is another guy who called it obsolete once, and this was Donald Trump, who will be US president again. Do you think that it's a possibility that the US could turn its back on NATO?
No.
Why?
Because, this thing, the one thing is daily politics and the money, and another thing are strategic questions that go deep down to the security issues. And I really think in the world that we are in now, that is becoming more competitive and more dangerous, only North America and Europe working together in NATO can keep our people safe. And at the end of the day, this sentence is always present. So never mind about the PR statements and discussions, but at the end of the day, the transatlantic bond is very strong, and this is the only what we have in terms of defense and in terms of our own security in the future. General mentioned the EU, and since I remember, since I was a very young diplomat, I'm very old now, but 30 years ago, around 1996, 1997, I was in Brussels. And there was this Saint-Malo declaration between Chirac and Blair with EU to become not only, how was the expression? I forgot the sentence, but to be an actor, not only an observer, also in a strategic political security dimension. But this is almost 30 years now, and we are still more or less, okay, some things happened because of the war in Ukraine. Germany is the most prominent NATO member country that really raised also its defense budget and helped also Ukraine. But we are still discussing, among others, how there are different, within the EU, there are different perceptions on how we should build our common CSDP, common security and defense policy in Europe. And the world out there in these 30 years, now take a look how Europe looked like in 1996, 1997, when there was Boris Yeltsin, when everything looked, Europe whole and free, new democracies. We were on the brink of becoming NATO and EU members. I remember those days in Brussels. This was completely another Europe as it is today.
Well,
and compare it to what we have now, the division between East and West in the EU, that is deeper and deeper. And for me personally, this is the biggest danger for our unity on other questions. And you have Russia.
That the European Union is split.
The European Union is split internally between East and West. You can see this in discussions in the EU, not split formally, but if you look, if you read papers, if you listen to discussions that are in EU, you have Hungary, Poland, other Eastern European countries, then you have old liberal democracies in West Europe. And there is a kind of a, we are daily witnessing some unanimities in the EU, which is not good.
Well, and there's some actors, obviously, who are happy to exploit divisions.
Of course, as always in history.
Yeah, just a few words to that. Of course, we see, or we saw during the last decade, I would say, since the Obama administration, at least, a substantial military shift to the Pacific Rim. This is something that you can observe. This is where the priorities go, where the force developments are looking at is not Europe, it's the Pacific. So from the military perspective. And deterrence is something that we are not discussing in Austria at all. Deterrence is one of the cornerstones of a functioning balance of power in Europe and NATO versus anyone who would attack. As soon as this deterrence is in question, the whole balance of power is in question. And we heard what was said is, will we be providing soldiers to defend those countries who do not invest and things like that? This is something that is not helpful, I would say, from a military perspective.
Do you think that the deterrence is in question?
At the moment, not.
Okay.
No. But this is something that we really need to observe very closely if this deterrence is still working. And the EU has no ambition for defense of the EU territory. We need to see that. This is done within NATO. This is a blind spot in the Austrian perception. Because not only 97%, but all the European countries would have to duplicate their effort if they would go for a EU defense plan. They would do the same again what is now being done within NATO. Why should they do it? This is a special situation, and what our catalogs and all the things that we are doing in Brussels.
Well, they would do it if they would not trust the US anymore.
Well, this has started with Helsinki in 1997, and it's always only out of area. Member states do not support something like that. They don't have the manpower and they don't have the will to do it in a double way. And now, coming back to Austria, we need to see the first question that you asked about, the question of neutrality and the ambiguity between Austria and NATO. In Austria, we don't even say one thing that the Swiss Minister of Defense said: neutrality ends in case you are attacked.
Yes.
This is a clear thing that if a neutral is being attacked, he doesn't stay neutral anymore because he's part of the war. And this is also something that you would need to prepare for.
Last question before I would open up the floor. You have mentioned Article 42.7 of the European Treaty. As you are responsible for planning, would you exactly know what Austria would do if another member state is attacked?
No.
No.
We have some elements available that could be provided. Because in our force planning we have some elements that we are only voluntary going abroad that can be deployed. So when the French asked for support after the terrorist attack, we contributed with a transport aircraft to free up French resources for other things. And the harder it gets, the more assets would be needed, and I think there would be some pressure on us to do the utmost.
Yes, but is this politically clear in Austria? I believe it should be, because in case of emergency, you simply do not have the time.
This is a little bit the same with the good and bad weather. Is the weather already bad enough that they are thinking of the umbrella? I'm not sure.
All right. Well, thanks a lot. Ending on this note, before I open up the floor for Q&A, please let me ask Knut Kirste to say some words. He's the NATO liaison officer here in Austria. Please, if the mic is over there, and yes.
Well, thank you, and does it work? Yeah. And thank you to the Diplomatic Academy for hosting this morning's event. I just wanted to make two comments this morning. First, on NATO Austria. NATO values its partnerships. Obviously, you mentioned that, and they are evolving, as you said, but they remain very critical for us. It's perhaps interesting to know that our new Secretary General, Mark Rutte, has determined 3 fundamental goals for NATO as we move towards the first summit next year under his reign in The Hague, and that is, of course, deterrence and defense, supporting Ukraine, and strengthening our partnerships. So that tells you that partnerships will remain critical and essential for us. And NATO has been and continues to value our long-standing partnership with Austria. I mean, you have developed interoperability, as you mentioned, General, but you also maintain a strong political dialogue and practical cooperation with the alliance. And all this, by the way, while maintaining neutrality, and that's a choice NATO fully accepts and supports. And so NATO is open to further strengthen and enhance our cooperation and partnership with Austria to a level that Austria feels comfortable with. And we do see actually a welcome opportunity to further define the priorities of our mutual partnership in the coming month, when, as you know, we will jointly determine a new partnership framework that will reflect your priorities and our priorities for our common partnership. So that is an excellent opportunity to, as I said, define more clearly what the priorities of that partnership should be. And that document then in turn will be the basis for our future cooperation and political dialogue. And then second, Ambassador Geržina, I really want to express our heartfelt gratitude to you, your team, and also especially your deputy, Barbara Gramza, for your very dedicated and enthusiastic, I must say, role as contact point embassy over the past 4 years. So just to understand, NATO relies on these contact point embassies to communicate with audiences in our partner countries. And you have developed a very ambitious, I would say, program to engage with political, academic, also media representatives in Austria to help get across NATO's message and to help the Austrian body politique to better understand what's today's NATO and what are our policies. Because as was mentioned earlier, there's still a lot of misunderstanding about what NATO is today. So that is much appreciated, and it has helped, I think, it has helped Austria to better understand today's NATO. And in turn, it has helped us in Brussels, NATO, to better understand the discourse and the thinking of Austria about this partnership. So many thanks for that indeed. very helpful. And I must say, it was truly exemplary, the work you've done with your colleagues as a contact point embassy. And we do look forward to actually welcoming then Croatia and Bulgaria as they take on their role as contact point embassies in the future. So, and again, thank you for this, and thank you for today's discussion. It's very useful, and thank you for having me.
Thank you. It's not over yet. We still got a little bit of time, right?
We still got
so
28 days.
So the floor, I mean, also for this event, the floor is open. Yes, please, over there, and then over there. Could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah.
And we take 2 questions or 3 at a time, please.
I see. So, Jun Saito, a student of University of Vienna, and one question for General Hofbauer. So, the question for you is, probably the NATO membership of Austria is the optimal choice because of the access to information flow, because Austria cannot take part in any discussion inside the NATO, and then Austria has handicap with information because now, as you mentioned, NATO is a dominant organization in defense policy in Europe, and NATO and EU is conduct intensively. And Mr. Ambassador Geržina, I have one basic question. So, how did the contact between Slovenian embassy on the one hand and Austrian authorities like defense ministry or foreign ministry on the other hand function? So some regular exchange of opinion or such a thing. So some example of common activity between Slovenia as a contact point and Austria. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We take another question. Mr. Fillinger, please. Please direct the questions to one of the participants.
My name is Günter Fellinger. I'm campaigning actively for Austria joining NATO since 2 years. I've collected 6,800 signatures last year for NATO membership, so there is a certain segment of society. Also, I would like to inform you that the NEOS youth movement have now, 2 weeks ago, made the official position that they support, and it's the first soon hopefully government party youth wing which has officially endorsed NATO membership, and I'm also working intensively with my friends in the Austrian People's Party and in all political parties to change that public opinion. Maybe to the ambassador directly a question. You always say in your statements that it's an Austrian decision, but we are EU member and we decide about many things together in the European Parliament constantly. We also decide about the support for Ukraine constantly together as a political union, which we are in the European Union. I understand your diplomatic efforts, obviously, to say that we are a sovereign country, but we know that in Austria. Why don't you, at least as an ambassador, say that it's in the Slovenian interest that Austria is also joining NATO? This would help the civil society in Austria in the case if all diplomats from allied countries in the European Union and NATO would change a little bit their narrative and their statement towards Austrian neutrality, saying in the respect of our own sovereignty, but it is in the interest of the NATO allies if Austria would also join NATO. That would be extremely helpful. Maybe also to the general one question, because your Minister Tana has last year said she will build an alliance of neutrals. Now this group is somehow reduced. Even Cyprus, I learned today, is considering NATO membership. And now with Ireland and with Malta left and Austria, what kind of defense arrangement Austria is planning with Malta and with Ireland together? Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Well, please, if you could...
So, is NATO membership the optimal choice? Is not a military question. This is a question. This is highly political. You need to understand that I can't answer that. Of course, I was working at the NATO headquarters, and as a partner, you are always looking into a black box. You don't know because you get something, and you don't know what's still in there. But as long either you are part of the club or you are not, but this is not a military decision. And if I just may go on, you need to ask the minister, not me.
Okay, well, this was a short answer. Yes, why don't you jump out of your diplomatic suit and tell Austrians what to do?
You know me, Christian. I am not always in a diplomatic suit, but we are doing this. We are showing interest in Austria's security concerns. But you know, if we would do this publicly and vocally, the other part of the political spectrum would say, hey guys, this is not okay. You are interfering in our domestic politics, domestic relations. It is on Austria. Nobody could take this decision but the Austrian political elite. And this discussion will come inevitably. You mentioned the NEOS party, the youth wing of the NEOS party, which, and I have to say the NEOS, this is the only party, if I can have this liberty to comment a little bit in my personal capacity.
Say what you want.
Not, I know, not as a diplomat. You know, some discussions that I witnessed in some of the parties reminded me on discussions in the Yugoslav Central Committee in the late 80s. It is so dogmatic, the positions on NATO in some of the parties, and this is not the FPÖ, are very dogmatic views on Western alliance, on the United States of America, on NATO. You wouldn't believe it, you know. So to take the role of Austrian political elite, you know, it would be over my, as we said, my pay grade. So it is on you, on the civil society. It's very good that you are here and that you are collecting the how do you call it? Signatures, and so on. So because this helps the civil society, and this helps also internally internal debates and discussions that this country will have to make inevitable. Because as I said at the beginning, the world will not be safer; it will be more dangerous. But otherwise, I'm optimistic. So it is on the Austrian political elite to, you know, to start to embark on this journey. And on the question of your question was how were the relations between NATO Contrapoint Embassy and the different ministries?
So my question is, thank you very much. My question is some examples of activity, common activity between Slovenian embassy and foreign ministry or defense ministry.
Yes, well, it was quite difficult with some of the ministries because, as I said, the positions are very dogmatic. With military, it was completely different. With military, over the course of last 4 years, we had great relations, good discussions, honest discussions on a number of issues, but with the politicians, not. I couldn't get NATO meeting of ambassadors with the defense minister Tana over the course of 4 years, and we tried several times. So this shows you how difficult it is still in after the war in Ukraine started, how difficult it is to, you know, to start to engage with Austrian politicians, irrespective of the political color. We had we focused then mainly on public relations. We had some high officials from NATO here. The former NATO Secretary General Robertson was here. We wrote some articles with the help of the media. We also make some a bit more vocal what NATO is actually doing and what NATO is all about. Because, as I said at the beginning, people in Austria, they don't know what NATO stands for. They have somewhere in their backheads that, you know, there is NATO, then Cold War, and so on, the Warsaw Pact, but not at all how NATO, how the perception of NATO is today.
Thank you. I think we still got time for a second round of questions. Yes, the ambassador of over there, please, and then the ambassador of Finland. Thank you.
Hello. Sorry, Emil Brix, Australian ambassador, and I'm intrigued at the discussion about the relationship between the European Union and NATO. The other security organization in Vienna is the OSCE. They have their ministerial meeting this week. Where do they fit into the strategic planning of Austria and Europe generally?
Thank you. Please, the ambassador of Finland.
A bit further away. Thank you for an interesting debate. If I may go back to Austria and the willingness to defend Austria. There was a very interesting study published by the University of Innsbruck sometime earlier this year, I think last spring. I don't quite remember the figures, but I remember two figures. Sort of 13-point-something Austrians were willing to defend other EU member states if they were attacked. But they expect, but first figure. Second figure, but sort of 75% of Austrians were expecting other EU member states to defend if Austria were attacked. These are pretty shocking figures. How do you explain them?
Thank you. We got a third one, yes, and a fourth one, please.
But the guy over there was first. So
Yes,
I think, yes.
okay, well, please.
Hi, my name's Evan Butler. I'm a member of the Diplomatic Academy. To the ambassador, I was wondering, to what extent do you think EU rules on debt and deficits, which need to be kept low, preclude states from investing properly, in their self-defense? And to the general, I think there's some ideas out there recently of common European defense procurement. To what extent do you think procuring materials together as a form of, de facto integration would help build enthusiasm for European defense? Thank you.
Okay, and yes, please.
Julian Miller from the British Embassy. A question for the General. We've heard more about Austria wanting increased interoperability with NATO, and it's in the security strategy as well. But I just wondered if you could explain that to me as a non-military person, what interoperability means in peacetime or in potential attack on an EU or NATO state, how that is at the moment, and what increased interoperability might actually mean in practical terms. And you can answer that either as a military man or perhaps what it means politically as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So, what's the role of OSCE was the first question.
Well, I can only give a very, I would say, political answer. The OSCE is the last organization where they still talk. And I'm not an insider into OSCE business, but from my perspective, it might be a chance that we use those procedures that are in place there to the best possible extent. I think there's not much more to say at the moment from my perspective.
If I may, Christian.
Of course.
As General said, this is the only forum where we talked with Russians. And I would say that the role of OSCE gained on importance because of that. I remember back then when we had the OSCE presidency, I was in the task force of that at that time, leading the task force for the OSCE presidency, and I remember how tough discussions we had already at that time with then Foreign Minister Ruppel and Lavrov. I could imagine how the discussions are today at the Permanent Council in OSCE, but nevertheless, it is extremely important. And OSCE was kind of, at the end of the 90s and so on, was seen as a sleeper organization in Vienna, and they were discussing a lot of things. But now it changed dramatically, and the OSCE is extremely important organization in our view and in my personal view. So yes, that this is an organization where we can talk with Russians.
Second question was about the willingness of Austrians to defend themselves and others. Why they expect that they are defended by others.
Yeah, Mrs. Ambassador, thanks for the question. This shows, normally I say, this shows the schizophrenia of the Austrian population. I wouldn't dare to say that in public, of course, but it's this.
You are in public.
Yeah, but more public.
No.
Yeah, not to the television. I hope we are not. Whatever. Can I explain it? Yes. There was a complete negligence in educating people on the values of democracy, of the need for defense, and not only for military defense, but for what Finland, Norway, Sweden is bringing to the public, civilian defense. We stopped to prepare immediately after the wall fell and the borders were opened, and there is no public awareness at all, and it's really hard. And you will know the so-called umfassende Landesverteidigung, the combination of civilian, military, economic, and mental defense is in our constitution. And it was a political thing that it was more or less killed and substituted by the so-called umfassende Sicherheitsvorsorge, which is only security. And this is driven by the Ministry of Interior because it was in a fight of resources. We didn't build any bunkers anymore because there is no threat awareness at all. And when it comes to the idea that somebody else will come and help us, if you tell them, and how does it work with neutrality, then they have no answer. So this is really schizophrenic. On the other side, with the 13% or 18% who are willing to defend, this is, from my perspective, a relative thing, because the pressure is not high enough at the moment. The pressure is not felt. The threat perception in Austria is completely different from threat perception further to the east. But what I always stress, also in public, if Ukraine falls, it's only Hungary and Slovakia between us and a potentially aggressive country. And then things change completely for Austria.
Can I take
Please.
one opportunity to defend Austria? This will be a breaking news.
Anytime. We need defenders.
You know, I would really like to use this opportunity because it's not so often. You know, Austria has a long tradition when it comes to engage in security environment and so on, with blue helmets in the Golan Heights over decades, in the Balkans, in Kosovo, and they're still there. So, you know, they engage somehow. Of course, these public figures that my friend Nina mentioned, the Finnish ambassador, this does not show a very good picture in terms of how the perception is, because one thing that is crucial in the Western Alliance is that, how to say it, one for all for one. So this is the basic animus in consolendo liber. It's written in the room where a permanent council met and so on. So this is the basic idea of allies. And being an ally today in this world, what more you can wish? And sometimes I wonder for Austrians to have such a hesitant approach, not in a relationship with NATO, but as towards the alliances, because alliances will be very important in the future.
We had one question about the budget. They're under constraint all over Europe. Will there be enough money for defense in the end?
This was your question.
Yes, it was directed to you.
I guess yes, because this is a long process, and as I mentioned, you can see in some EU member countries and NATO countries that were very hesitant concerning NATO in the last decades, such as in terms of their military budgets, such as Germany. They increase their military budget substantially, not to mention the Baltic countries, Poland and some other countries. So yes, I guess if this is the essential question, if we want to have EU as a global actor, blah, 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 also in military terms, it starts and ends with money. So show me the money, and I'll give you whatever you want.
The question
We are
about
coming up with
procurement.
the procurement and also for the money. We will see if there will be a deeper discussion on taking out the military expenditure from the Maastricht criteria, because that might be something that might be helpful. Because if I talk to my Ministry of Finance guys, they always say, we are now Maastricht, and you need to know, and it costs a lot of money, because we have done enough for 30 years. And it costs a lot of money, especially in Austria, because we have even done less than the rest over the last years. For the common European defense investment and the industry, two brief things. One is the funding from the governments needs to be steady, and the industry needs to be assured that their investment brings some return. If we all go to sleep again once there is a ceasefire in Ukraine, we will be sorry in 5 or 6 years. And we need to deregulate, because it's easier for us to do a foreign military sales with the US than buy something in Germany. That's the truth also. And for the interoperability that you ask, there are many aspects of interoperability. The one thing is technical interoperability, so that the British Eurofighter can land in Austria and be refueled. The highest degree of interoperability is commonality. And this is something that, especially for the land forces, is very hard to be achieved, because you might have the same attack helicopter, but you even might have the same air-to-ground missiles that you fit on the helicopter, but they might not fit on the British, that fit on the German or on the Dutch one. You see, this is also a question of interoperability, but the main question of interoperability is to have the same doctrine, to understand, put it bluntly, we attack, that everybody knows what it means, we attack, and that we can understand and work together side by side in an operation. This is the main point for interoperability, and this goes for the NATO nation. Is the same if you have troops in the Baltics in a mixed brigade combat team from various nations. They need to be interoperable. The staff needs to know how the staff procedures are working, and of course also the computers need to talk to each other, and not we have here a system from country A and here a system from country B, and they have only one thing, which is a USB, and you switch it from one computer network to the other. So this is hopefully something that explains what interoperability is bringing.
All right. Aleksander, the famous last words are yours.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank both Christian, you and General Hofbauer for being with us today. And I would like to thank my colleagues from the diplomatic community who are present here. And yes, as I said, you know, the world, though, it would be interesting future for Austria, but you know, you have to be positive. The famous Austrian composer, in terms of coming to a new discussion or forms of discussion in Austria, there is time. Austrian composer Mahler said if an apocalyptic earthquake would happen, he would like to be in Vienna, because here everything happens 50 years later. So there is plenty of time to, you know.
All right.
And
it's a very positive note. Thanks.
And of course, I wish also my Croatian and Bulgarian colleagues, they split 2 years between themselves. So we've been alone for 4 years. So you really can see what the perception in NATO is, how difficult Austria as a partner country is.
Must feel like Hercules.
But anyway, I wish you all the best for your activities in the coming 2 years. And thank you,
Yes.
Christian, once again.
Let me also thank you for this very substantial and open discussion. Thanks you all for coming, and have a nice day.
And there is a small reception just following.
All right.
Now. So you are all invited. Thank you.
Dankeschön.
Großartig, danke.
Vielen Dank.
Super, danke. Wir können uns das ausmachen. Ich habe das jetzt nur